Welcome to our sixth webinar that's in the series of patriarchal inscriptions, convened by a new research program, Patriarchal Inscription, hosted by King's College, the Arts and Humanities Research Institute. And I welcome you on behalf of my colleagues, co-conveners, Toby Levin von Gleichen and Comfort Mohr. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us, those who've been with us from the start and those who are joining us for the first time. Thank you very much again to King's College and to the Institute for their incredible support and giving us the IT support of Taylor Annabelle in particular, who will be sort of behind the scene managing the technical issues that are associated with Microsoft Teams. As I was saying, this is already the sixth webinar, and we have been very ably supported in an application of software. This is not quite as ideal as we would like it to be. In other words, I will have to forewarn you, those who are joining us today, it is not as interactive as we would wish this to be. It has its limitations. And we are trying to compensate by, first of all, paying a lot of attention to the Q&A dialog box, and my colleague Comfort will be sort of managing that. So you're writing all your questions, your comments, your feedback into the dialog box, and will then be extracting the questions from that and be giving them to the presenters. Yeah, I know this is not great, but we have to blame, the moment, the pandemic, for that. What we are also trying to think of, we are in the process of setting up a YouTube site where all the recordings, including the first webinars you may have missed out, will be available, accessible to you, and that's part of the King's College domain. And we'll be able to go live next week, and we'll let you know, we'll let you have that information. So very, very happy to have that particular way of making up for what is not the greatest kind of situation. We are also hoping to prepare a publication as a special issue journal or a monograph, but we'll talk about that later on. So there are ways of sort of making up for the limitations of technology right now. But having said that, we are learning, and we have the fantastic support of our team here at King's College. What is the shape of this afternoon's program? We'll be having the presentations after very short introductions, and then very brief questions, just in terms of a couple of questions in terms of clarification, questions to be asked to, elaborate on particular issues, and then the next presentation. And the wider, more extensive conversation will come at the end. So please let me reiterate, we do depend on you to feed your questions into the Q&A box. This is so important. And we will, and Comfort will make sure that all your questions are taken care of. Whatever is not coming to the conversation, it will all be archived and stored, and we'll find, additional sessions on which perhaps to arrange for a more interactive kind of gathering. So what is happening today? It is the sixth webinar, but it is the second session within the theme of mother-daughter relationship, the exploration of the sphere of intimacy, of emotion within which to locate and situate and problematize FGM. And this follows explorations of the two previous themes. First of all, the context of democracy, populism, the challenges to democracy, but also the impact of the pandemic on the issues surrounding FGM, the impact more widely seen on women's rights and women's rights violation. And this was then followed by debates around very difficult issues over tensions between respect for difference, and that is something that all cross-cultural research and activism entails, the tension between respect for difference and concealed subordination of significance of women's human rights in terms of other kind of priorities. And we discussed, the very problematical issues around ethical and cultural relativism, the application of global tools for change at local level, and the role of law. This is the second webinar within this sphere of intimacy, of intimate relations, where love, affection, belonging, identification, sacrifice, and we see that in terms of mother-daughter relationship in particular, complicate and problematize how women themselves, girls and women, are living the experience of FGM and negotiate that particular experience in terms of other kind of values and priorities. So as we were saying last week, this particular kind of research entails huge issues over approaches, over methodologies of how the researcher accesses this kind of work, and thus the role of the researcher, the self-critical reflexivity that is entailed in terms of how the researcher sees her relationship with what is research. And we are continuing in this way with with today's webinar. There will be two major presentations, and here I have to point out, unfortunately, we have a change in our program due to circumstances that are control. So instead of the original program, we will have Lara Kingston and Maria Tara, and we have Revan Youssef. Unfortunately, Daniela, Hrzán, and Evelyn are unable to present, but we will have a chance, I gather, for Evelyn to give presentation at a later stage. Let me then turn to the first presentation here, and that is Lara Kingston, together with Maria Tara. Voices to End FGM, using storytelling to shift social norms. So if I can invite Lara and Maria to give their presentation.
Great, thank you. We are so pleased to be part of this series of presentations. My name is Lara Kingston. I'm the SEO Communication Coordinator, and I'm joined by Maria Taher, the US Executive Director and co-founder of the organization. So as you mentioned, Maria, today we will be introducing our Voices to End FGMC project, and we'll be screening some powerful videos created in the project that touch on FGMC and its complex connection to the mother-daughter relationship. And I'm going to turn it over to Maria to give a little background on the organization.
Thank you so much, Lara. Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Taher, and I'm so glad to be here today and to be able to speak about this theme of mother-daughter relationships and tell you a little bit more about SEO and also how we have been really highlighting this particular relationship in the context of FGMC. So just to give you a little context on SEO. SEO was founded in 2015, and there were 5 co-founders originally. And our mission is to empower Asian and other communities to end female genital cutting and mutilation and create positive social change through dialogue, education, and collaboration based on community involvement. And SEO is actually the South Asian Bora Gujarati word for friends. It really reflects our mission to engage in collective community-based solutions. So we work with survivors of FGC, their families, and their larger religious ethnic communities nationwide, also internationally, virtually and in person. Well, in the pandemic, it's much more virtually, to really provide support and to enable a shift in culture that does not fear or repress women and girls' bodies and female sexuality, but really looks to embrace them as normal in all their varied forms and expressions in order to protect future generations from this harm. And we really recognize that FGMC is a social norm done for a variety of reasons in various communities. And therefore, our theory of change is really based on this idea of creating a critical mass of voices who can speak up publicly on this issue to support an end to FGMC. And in order to do this, our organization uses a variety of different storytelling programs. And I should say that we have a very broad definition of storytelling, including data collection and research, because we do recognize that as a way as representation and an important way to tell a story. But today, Laura is going to be highlighting one of our storytelling programs, the Voices to End FGMC project. So I'm going to actually let her talk about that more now.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. So one of the ways that we build that critical mass is by the Voices to End FGMC project. And basically what we're doing here is trying to bring people together so they can share their stories and also heal from their experiences of FGMC. The goal is that they can connect, but also grow as leaders in their own communities. By creating these short videos calling for an end to the harmful practice, they can begin to start taking the next steps. So this project is a collaboration with Story Center, and many of the storytellers in the project are survivors. But not just survivors, we also have advocates, family members, people from FGC practicing communities who were not cut. So the interesting thing with this project is we take a look at the issue from a wide array of perspectives, because we believe there are many different stakeholders in ending the practice. So communication research suggests that stories can have greater reach and impact when they're told as short videos and circulated widely in local community settings and through social media. So the Voices workshop, they offer a safe space for participants to explore their creativity as they craft these compelling multimedia pieces, which are subsequently shared publicly to encourage communities to abandon FGC and also to urge policymakers to ban the practice. So through participatory media as well as community building activities, Voices supports survivors of FGC in living more purposeful and healthy lives. It can enhance their self-respect and confidence and mobilize them to take leadership in the effort to change social norms regarding FGC. So this project started back in 2018 as a group of 9 US-based survivors. But as the project moved along, it's been used as an educational tool to discuss FGMC amongst survivors and within practicing communities. These videos can start conversations and dialogues that weren't necessarily happening before. So the videos that were produced have been shared widely through online distribution and through pre-pandemic screening events, and also through media articles. So we saw there was a bigger project there than the initial 2018 start. So SEO Stories has expanded and is now called Voices to End FGMC. And we've had 3 storytelling workshops held, as well as a pilot online workshop. We're hoping and we're planning to do another online workshop in 2021, and we'll share a little bit of that information after sharing a few of the pieces, the videos themselves. So next, we'll share a quote from a participant from one of our past workshops. So Ms. Su Sun says, "Participating in the storytelling process allowed me to be audacious, to heal and to denounce the way in which women's bodies are subjected to violence. Sharing this process with other women was a beautiful process of collective empowerment that allowed us to be visible while using our imagination, art, poetry, music, and colors." So we wanted to share this quote to illustrate the healing component of these workshops. As essential as it is to be spreading the videos to the general public, starting these conversations, it's also essential to be able to tell one's own story in one's own word. And that cannot be as underestimated in its inherent cathartic and healing value. So some words that have repeatedly come up in evaluations about the program are authenticity, empowering, powerful, connection. So it's clear that Ms. Sun is not alone in finding a transformative feeling from this workshop. We have participants in these workshops that come from all over the world, from India, America, Sierra Leone, Egypt, UK, Bahrain, Singapore, Sweden. We find the global nature of our participants can be helpful in counteracting misunderstandings about where FGM and FGC happens, proving that the practice is truly a global issue.
Great, thank you, Laura, for that. So we wanted to dive into the specific mother-daughter theme, but we really wanted to first be able to give you some context about the Voices Project. As Laura mentioned, that the project has been very global in nature, and one of the reasons that this project is incredibly healing and cathartic for survivors and community advocates who are working on this issue is because they're able to tell a story relating to the topic of FGMC that most resonates with them. So it might, some survivors talk about the actual experience of undergoing FGC or FGM. Others talk about their advocacy issues. Others talk about backlash. And one theme that we saw that emerged over and over again was this theme relating to mothers and daughters, and really talking about that complex relationship. And the idea that the relationship can be affected, particularly since FGC is a form of gender-based violence where we see oftentimes women are continuing it onto women. And so the project really does go, as I said, beyond the actual incident to really look at the complexity of this issue and all the complicated nuances that come along with FGC. So with that in mind, we wanted to show and highlight a few of the videos that do touch upon the relationship, the mother-daughter relationship. They also highlight a few other components of FGMC, but we picked these specific videos because of that theme and recognizing how important it is and something that should be recognized as a consequence of FGMC too. So I'll turn it back to Laura.
So before we are honored to screen these videos from these unbelievable women, just a few notes about them. These videos are not graphic in nature, but they do have upsetting and sometimes disturbing content. So if you need for self-care to not watch these, no worries if you need to take a few minutes off. And feel free to add comments in the chat box. We'd love to hear all your thoughts aloud, but in this circumstance, any reactions or things you'd like to say, feel free to add them to the chat. So the first video that we'll be sharing is by Zenu Banu. And Zenab here shares the chilling story of undergoing FGMC as a young girl. At her mother's request, she was taken by an aunt to the home of strangers, where she was held down and cut. Zainab was too shocked to say anything, but she refused for some time to speak to her mother. Years later, after realizing that the painful sex she experienced was related to the practice, she successfully protects her granddaughter from what she went through.
One day, when I came home from school, my mother told me, after you eat, you must go with Zara Masi to purchase some important books we need. So we went to a street in the Pohra area of Udaipur. Zara Masi knocked on the door of a house. An elderly lady came out and told us to follow her. We came to a small room where two ladies were sitting. We joined them on the floor. They asked me my name, surname, and about my parents, my school, to keep me busy talking. Suddenly, One of them held me down. She forcefully kept me in her grip and said, "See the golden bird up above the cupboard." As I looked up, the other lady pulled down my pants and cut my squirrel hood. In grave pain, I shouted, "Bachao, bachao," as loudly as I could, but no one came to my rescue. The woman who cut me applied some ghee over the wound, put a semi-wet cloth there, and put to my pants again. I was too shocked to say anything. Zeramasi hugged me and said, "Please stop weeping." She brought me home, where my mother lifted me in her arms and gave me chocolates. But I felt cheated by her, and in revenge I stopped talking with her for quite some time. Years later, when I married and faced painful sex, I realized the consequences went far beyond that one day with Zeramasi. I tried to find out why Bora girls are cut, but found no mention of it in the Quran Sharif. So I began to speak and write against Khatna. I have no daughters, but thank God I have saved my granddaughter from this cruel practice.
The next video is entitled Why by Fakera Merchants. So a bustling Bohra neighborhood in Mumbai is the setting for Fakera's story, which describes her confusion at being taken by her mother to an unknown woman who asked her to remove her panties and then performed FGMC on her. Fakera experiences the sense of betrayal she experiences and yearns to understand why her mother, who is progressive in many ways, allowed her to be cut.
Before I show the video, I just quickly wanted to actually mention one thing. And we're going to be showing a behind the scenes video so you can get a sense of the workshop a little bit more in terms of what the participants go through. These first two videos that you're seeing, the participants all actually have complete control over their videos in terms of they create their scripts, they get to decide the images and pictures that they want. And with these ones that are drawn, we were able to, in our pilot virtual workshop, pair storytellers with artists. And so they were able to talk to the artists about how they wanted to depict their stories. So the idea was, again, really to give agency back to the survivors. And I just wanted to clarify, bring that up. And that was something that the participants of that particular workshop really loved being able to do.
It was a summer day when I was taken by my mother to Bhendi Bazaar, a bustling Bora neighborhood in Mumbai. My grandmother lived there, but that day we did not go to her house. Instead, my mother took me to a building in one of the by-lanes of the Mohalla, as it is called. I do not really recall what floor this lady lived on. All I know is that it was a dark room. I was frightened. I held my mother's hand very tight. And this lady, I had never seen her before. And she drew me to her and cajoled me to take off my panties. And I was just wondering, Why is this stranger asking me to take off my panties? I had always been strictly instructed to never allow anyone to touch me. And here was the stranger drawing me towards her, but I was supposed to follow my mother's instructions. And my mother said, "Don't worry, nothing is going to happen to you. It's all fine." Mom, why did you say that it's all fine when you knew I was going to be cut? You are an educated person who never buckles under any pressure from anyone. You have always been modern in your views. You were among the first in your family to study yoga. You were the first to learn ballroom dancing. You were the first to wear Western clothes. And all of this was a challenge in our social norms. But you did it anyway. So why were you blindly following this tradition of Khatna without even questioning it? Why? Why? This question will always remain with me. Why does patriarchy dictate so many important aspects of a woman's life? Sex, iddat, inheritance of property. All of this is dictated by patriarchy. And all of it is to clip a woman's wings. This must end completely.
The next video is called A Daughter's Questions by Maria Haidari. In her powerful story, Maria remembers a media interview that her mother agreed to do, but the decision she made years ago to have Maria undergo female genital cutting as a young girl. Although she knows that her mother loves her, she continues to wonder why she couldn't have made a different choice.
Mom, do you remember when we talked to that reporter? We went upstairs so Dad couldn't hear us. I was fidgeting nervously on the sofa. You were focused on making sure there were enough samosas and laddus for your guest. I didn't know what to expect because growing up, we didn't discuss sex. We didn't discuss it when I was 13 and didn't know the horrible pains in my stomach were period cramps. We didn't discuss it when I was 12 and you silently placed a pack of bras wrapped in brown paper in my room. And we didn't discuss it when I was 6 and you took me to the apartment of an elderly relative to be cut. Yet, over 30 years later, you agreed to discuss female genital cutting with me and this reporter. You told her how you waited in the next room because you couldn't bear to see your little girl suffer, but also how you were convinced what you did was right. When the reporter asked me if I blamed you, I said no, that you were just as much a victim as I was. Only sometimes I'm not so sure. I know you love me and my sisters. As kids, you sewed us matching outfits and sang us Urdu lullabies. Even now, I know you will come running to take care of my boys and massage my head if I get a migraine. Still, I wonder if you really had to do it. I know it must have been hard for you to say no, but you still had a choice. You could have spared us. Why didn't you? I don't know what I was hoping you'd share with that reporter that day. Sorrow, empathy, regret. Whatever it was, I didn't hear it then, and I'm not sure I ever will. But I'm trying to make peace with that so I can move on. I hope my story will help break the taboo against speaking about sex and female genital cutting that still exists in many religious communities.
So the next video is from our own Maria Taher, and it's entitled Forgiveness. So Maria learned when her parents came to visit her that her openness about having experienced khatna, female genital cutting, may impact their standing in the Bora community. After a tense interaction with her mother, both of them come to a place of love and acceptance, and Maria is able to forgive her mother for taking her to be cut as a young girl.
My mother was furious when I first saw her at Boston Logan Airport. She kept telling my father, "You talk to your daughter. Make her understand what she did was wrong." They had come to see me graduate from my MFA program, but it seemed as if my mother had come to scold me for revealing to ABC News I had been cut at the age of 7. Female genital cutting was supposed to be kept silent. I had done the opposite. A religious leader at my parents' mosque had informed my dad there might be trouble for them because of what I had done. 2 days later, my mother's tone changed. We were sitting in my parents' hotel room. My mother said, "Maria, why couldn't you have only talked about your research on khatna? Why did you say you had gone through it?" As my mother's face softened, I saw she still might have guilt over it. She once told me my aunt had gone with us when she took me to have khatna done. She was afraid to see me in pain and needed my aunt's support. I don't recall my aunt's presence, but I do remember my mother taking me in her arms, holding me tight, and wiping away my tears. In the hotel room, as my mother and I spoke to each other, I wondered if the reason why so many women don't discuss khatna or acknowledge it as harmful is because to speak of it out loud is to admit our community caused pain to its daughters. Matching the calming voice my mother was now using, I told her, "I've never blamed you." She didn't respond right away, but we looked at each other and understood we had forgiven one another. I hope my story will create a ripple effects of women and girls who are sharing their female genital cutting stories so that we can create culture change and we can prevent future generations of girls from undergoing female genital cutting.
This is Maria again. I just want to quickly mention for the last 2 videos, it's a coincidence that both our names are Maria, but these 2 videos were created in our 2018 workshop, and all of the participants wanted to do a little end piece where they talked about what they hoped from the video, which is why you saw that in Maria's video and, well, both of the Maria videos too.
So we'd like to share a little bit of the behind the scenes of this whole process of these workshops. Essentially, in 2016, Maria created her first digital story about experiencing FGC and advocating against it. And afterwards, she began fundraising to create a workshop where more survivors and more advocates working to end FGC could also create digital stories. So for centuries, women have been afraid to speak up about FGMC for fear of being ostracized from their communities, from being labeled as victims, and maybe getting loved ones in trouble. These 9 women from the original Seyo stories differ in race and ethnicity, age, citizenship, residency status, but each shared a story addressing a different challenge with FGMC. Some women who had only recently discovered they had undergone FGMC were grappling with its emotional and physical impacts, where others were invested in advocacy to prevent it happening to more girls. We are planning online in-person screenings across the US, or we have in the past pre-pandemic, and we hope to again in the future. This collection is woven together with a united sentiment and a joint hope that these videos will build that critical mass of voices from within FGC practicing communities, calling for the end of this harmful practice. So this is our final video, The Making of Seyo Stories.
And we wanted to show this again to give you a sense of what the in-person workshops are like. Our virtual ones are a little different, but we still have, based on our evaluations, storytellers really love taking part in those workshops too. But this is from our first workshop.
Just make sure that you really take your time with it. So just don't rush And then I like to record people all the way through, but if you make a mistake, it's okay. Don't worry, you can just stop and pause and start again at the beginning.
It's 1980. I'm 7 years old on vacation in Karachi, Pakistan. I follow her into the dark entrance up 2 flights of stairs. We pause outside a badly scratched door, and my aunt rings the bell.
Good?
Yeah,
Do you think it sounds better?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, great.
thank you.
That's it.
Two years ago, I took part in a workshop with Story Center. It felt really important that we organize this workshop so that we can have other women who either have undergone female genital cutting, female genital mutilation, or know of women in their families or others in their community members who have undergone it, for them to tell their own stories in their own words.
I chose to tell this particular story because I feel very misunderstood.
I chose to tell this particular story in the workshop to highlight how traumatizing the experience of being cut is.
I think before speaking out, before taking a stance, before figuring out your own viewpoint, first you need to understand fully what's happened so you can reflect and move on from there and start to heal.
And I would like other survivors of FGM just to stand out, to get that strength, to be able to step up, and also to talk about the pain.
Even though this is a harmful practice, we can learn to forgive each other, and we can hope with that forgiveness to be able to prevent it to future generation of girls.
Initially, I thought sharing my story with the group would be difficult because there are a lot of sort of raw emotions that I still had.
Sharing the story the first day was a bit of a surprise to me because I became emotional, and this happened 70 years ago.
It was difficult to really talk about it because it feels very selfish. A lot of people were telling their stories about their own cutnas, and I don't remember my own.
I haven't really shared my story publicly. This was my first time doing it with a big group.
I was very nervous about it initially because I didn't think I could do that much in 3 days.
I'm really new to speaking out. I just started to get involved with advocacy and activist groups just earlier this year. And before that, I kind of sat with my own disagreement with FGC.
And in that sense, it helped me to overcome some of the shame that has lingered with me as a result of being cut to this day.
I've seen growth within me. I've grown, and I've also enjoyed, that sisterhood, the unity that, every other participant showed.
And it's actually strengthened my love for my community. And, even though I disagree with this one practice, that love is still very strong, and it's a part of who I am.
I'm hoping that viewers will realize that female genital mutilation is not just something that happens to people of a different color in a faraway land.
Supporters of genital cutting claim that the cutting in the Bora community is just like a nick or a scrape that causes no harm and in fact may enhance sexual pleasure. Through my story, I want to explain how in fact it is a form of violence that has remained and foreshadowed my life.
I really hope that when people watch my video, that they'll understand that I love my mother, and yes, I did undergo this, and she did take me to have FGC done or Katna done, but she was a great mother and she did what she thought was right at the time.
I hope people will realize that FGC is complicated. It's not just a one-sided, one-dimensional kind of issue, and also that, mother-daughter, mother-child relationships can be very complicated. You can still love your mother very much and still maybe question some of the decisions that she made.
One of my more immediate goals is to take all the really important messages that I heard and take them home and talk with the people around me first, because I think if everybody starts those conversations, then little things add up to big things.
In the future, I hope to reach out to individuals who might be against the practice of FGC in the community, but they're just afraid to speak out for whatever reasons.
There is a hope for young girls out there if we can only unite together all over the world and say no to FGM.
And I want people to know that it's okay, you know, it doesn't change your identity, it doesn't change who you are.
The hope is that as we share these stories, we can inspire other women and other men, even from communities where this might be occurring, to help speak up publicly about it and really stop female genital cutting from being a taboo topic that is only talked about in private circles to something that is public and something that we all can recognize is a harmful practice that we need to end.
Just make sure.
All right, so those were the videos we wanted to show all of you. We have a lot more videos, but these ones we wanted to show because they touched on the mother-daughter relationship. If you are interested in seeing other videos, we have a link on our last slide that we can also share afterwards in the chat box or something, so that you can take a look at that. But we want to, and Laura mentioned this at the beginning, that we do have a upcoming Voices to End FGMC workshop. This one will be virtual again due to the pandemic. And we are really excited about this because we have done one virtual workshop in the past prior to the pandemic. So we know how to really put that together nicely and make it, have it in a way that still builds community and gives that sense of healing and being able to create a story where you have your own agency over what you're telling. And that's going to happen in January. Our in-person workshops happen over 3 days, but this one will be spreading out over 6 weeks with a 1-hour webinar each week to be able to sort of build in the learning components of the workshop and really have the group work together. If you're interested, there is a link on this slide and we can share that with participants as well, but feel free to apply, or you can also contact us, and we're really looking forward to that workshop as well. Oh, Laura, we can't hear you.
My apologies, sorry about that. Thank you everyone for including us in this event, and we're so glad to have been able to share the stories of these incredible women. Our contact is here, so get in touch if you have any questions, any thoughts, and again, below is the application link for our next cohort, so feel free to reach out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lara Kingston and Marietta. Thank you very much for this really powerful, very poignant presentation. We're so glad we were able to give you sufficient time for this. The power of storytelling is extraordinary. You know, I was thinking about our sort of previous presentations, the massive resources that are now marshaled in order to battle, challenge FGM practices and so on. We're talking about, you know, we had lawyers' presentations, talk about the kind of international, you know, conventions and treatises and domestic legislation. But the sort of nagging question always was, yes, despite all of that, why are there still these enduring practices? Why are there so few prosecutions? And one feels that, you know, with this kind of entrance into this complicated, difficult kind of emotional sphere, where the issue is, and this sort of inscribed itself on my mind as listening to you, when speaking out aloud on FGM, I'm afraid to cause pain. This is exactly it. You know, I'm afraid to cause pain to those I love. You know, because I love my mother who, you know, facilitated, the cat, who prepared, for this to happen. But I love her too. It is this kind of contradictory, the nature of that, these strong, intense emotion, the belonging, the sense of identification with your community that, needs bringing out. And I thought it was done so well, so poignantly. Comfort questions to follow up this particular presentation.
Thank you, Maria. Excellent. Thank you so much to Laura and Maria. Very, very powerful and inspirational story. Inspiring. Very, very good. We know that stories are more effective and very, very powerful to change attitude, to change mindset, to change behavior. So thank you for this. And also it helps to give more voice to the voiceless, and it helps other girls to come out to talk about their stories. We have so many questions for you. I will read them out and you will take in turns to answer them. First question says, this was, I think this is more like a comment. This was powerful. I'm interested in the choice to animate these stories, right? And then there's another one that says, are there cultural reasons that women accept their mother's choices? What are the norms of mother-daughter power dynamics in India? Shall I read more?
Maybe, enable you to answer
first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I'm happy to start, Laura. If you want to add anything, please feel free to do so. Thank you for those questions, and I'm glad to hear that other people found the stories powerful. And that was really our intention, was to be able to have the people affected, the women affected, being able to actually share their story, the vital aspect of what they wanted to share of their story. And the choice in terms of animation. So as I briefly mentioned, we did pilot a virtual workshop in 2019, so prior to the pandemic. And one of the reasons we did that was because we wanted to see if we could do this in a virtual way to be able to have more participants from around the world take part in the workshop. In the in-person workshops, people generally have the ability to, if they want to use their own pictures or like short video clips, as you saw, and we work with them to piece it together, but they really have control over what the storyboard of their story is, what it's going to visually look like, and then we help them with just kind of thinking things through. With the virtual workshop that we piloted, we actually had a little bit of funding to be able to work with artists too. And we gave the storytellers a choice. They could either, continue to do what we did in the in-person workshops, where it was like you can comb through your own pictures, you can use your own videos. We actually had one person in an in-person workshop who didn't want to use any of her pictures, but she hand drew little sketch things, which we didn't show that video, but it's very lovely done. It was just really stick figures, but the way that it was done was very moving too. But the two that we showed here that were animated, those storytellers really wanted to work with an artist, so they worked with that artist. It was their choice. They worked with artists. We had several artists who were interested in the project, and so the storytellers actually were able to tell us who their preference were based on the artist's portfolios, and then they connected and talked about their story, and just really were able to work with them to make sure that how they visually wanted to depict their story was coming through in the artist's renditions and everything. So that was the decision and how that happened. And then with the other question around cultural norms and mother-daughter relationships in India, I think this might be common for many communities. Mother-daughter relationships are very complicated, and I think it's up to the individual family too and those dynamics. I think with FGMC in general, it is a form of, violence or gender-based violence that we see mothers passing on to daughters in many various communities too, and there is that dynamic. And I can just say that within India, and particularly within the Bora community, there's a sense that FGC is in the women's sphere and realm. So really it is kind of the mother's choice, or if it's not the mother's choice, and you hear stories about it being other female relatives who are putting in the social pressure, and it's not necessarily the mother. And some of the stories mentioned how the mother didn't want to cause pain to their child, and that actually was similar to, since I shared my story, similar to my story, where my mother didn't want to cause pain either, but it was pressure from other female relatives which encouraged them to believe that this had to continue. So I think it is a very complicated custom, but I think those dynamics, this idea it's like a women's issue, the idea that tradition is much more powerful than I think a lot of people recognize and realize. But those types of dynamics are part of the reason this is continued, and it's a form of learned violence that happens generation after generation. So really thinking about how to break that cycle is very challenging. It can be done, and we're seeing it being done, which is wonderful, and we do see change happening. But those are some of the barriers in terms of working to end this globally.
Thank you, Maria. Definitely, like you rightly said, mother and daughter's relationship is very, very complex. I've got more questions for you and Lara. One says, why are positive stories of change like this is very important? Why is it important? That's one question. There's another one that says, what are the consequences if a mother doesn't cut her daughter? And I have a last one here. What do the community says are the benefit of doing it, which is performing FGM? How do they convince women who have had it done to pass this on to their daughters? And one woman mentioned okay, I think in the stories, one of the stories that you showed, it says here one woman mentioned enhancing sexual pleasure, that FGM enhances sexual pleasure, and this person was like, which I'm not sure might be untrue. So this is a question that this is untrue. How can it enhance sexual pleasure once you've removed the clitoris?
Well, I can at least take the first question. We find at SEO that it's so important to be sharing positive news, good news, signs of progress and change. When folks, we believe, only are seeing negative stories, and a lot of coverage is the bad things that are happening, there sometimes is a sense of, well, maybe it's hopeless. Maybe there's not a point in trying to change things, trying to get involved with an effort to shift tradition and dynamic. Whereas if we can show that, in fact, there are many people within communities that are pushing forward and saying, we want this to change, I think that shows people that this is, this is a movement that, so to speak, is succeeding, is that is pushing forward, and that people are going towards, and young people and cycles are being broken. So I think that by showing some positive change, we encourage folks to don't give up on this, get involved, because things are changing quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely echo Lara. There's the idea of positive deviance, where it is showing that there's even an option to not do this, and I think that that's sometimes just very novel in communities. The idea that there is this option. So I definitely agree with Lara there. And then to some of the other questions, consequences of not being cut. So communities vary, but I think one of the reasons why, at SEO we really recognize this as a form or a social norm is that because there have been many different justifications given for why this should continue, which include the idea of sexual control, reducing sexuality, reducing promiscuity, and increasing sexuality, which we've heard too, and I'll address that question as well. Health, hygiene, even though all of that is false, there are no health benefits, but we hear those reasons: tradition, culture, the idea of marriageability, identity. There are many different reasons given in many various communities for why this should continue, and it's really because it's been justified in people's minds that these are the reasons. So it's again, like I said, tradition is incredibly powerful, and all communities, everywhere have traditions, and harmful traditions too. So it's not just that FGC is harmful, but there are other forms of harmful traditions if we look at communities. But generally, there can be negative sanctions associated with not performing a particular practice, or the fear that there will be negative sanctions. So just in terms of an example, in the Bora community, there's a lot of fear of the idea of ostracization within the community if a girl doesn't undergo it. In some communities where if a girl doesn't undergo, there's fear that she will not be married. And that is, the idea of what is best for the girl. So the idea that she would not be marriageable can be a negative consequence. And, we've heard a lot of some of the backlash that we faced at our organization and within the Bora community too has been where we've had people who have initially wanted to speak about this, and then they might not be as invested with the community or involved or connected to the community, but they have family members who still are, and those family members are actually getting threats, or not necessarily death threats, but they're getting threats in terms of there might be trouble for you, there might be trouble to your business, particularly if it's very much connected to within the community. So there are a lot of possible negative sanctions there, or repercussions that sort of work to reinforce control of this continuing generation after generation. Sometimes it's the power of fear. It might not necessarily happen, but that fear consequence is incredibly powerful. And we've heard stories of that. And we've had people who have initially shared their stories and then come back to us and let us know that they can't do it anymore because they've been threatened or something has happened. And we've worked with them to remove their stories too, and that happens. Then just to go to that question around enhancing sexual pleasure, it's not true, but this is actually this is a reason that we're hearing in many communities, particularly I think communities that practice type 1 FGMC, which involves removing part or all of the clitoris or clitoral hood. And there is this false comparison to this idea that if you remove or expose part of the clitoral hood, it will actually give more stimulation to the clitoris, and so to increase the sexuality. It's not true, and it's I just want to completely mention that. But this is where you're hearing communities that are promoting this, trying to justify it and trying to demystify this idea of sexual control, because I think in some way there's a recognition that the idea of controlling a woman is not acceptable. So if you can almost twist it around and say that it increases sexuality, becomes more acceptable. And again, it's not true, but that is what we're seeing that, and we're encountering that, and it's kind of amazing to see this backlash happening in that way. And I think there was another question. Or did I answer all the questions?
I think the other one is I think you've mentioned the benefits of performing FGM.
Yeah, and again, there are no benefits, but again, it's connected to that idea of negative sanctions within a community or culture for not undergoing it, but there are no benefits to this.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, both Laura and Maria, and also thank you to the participants for the lovely questions that you're posting. I'll give the floor back to Maria.
Thank you, Comfort. Yeah, brilliant. Really, really interesting to listen to you. Because we have a bit the luxury of time, may I be selfish and just add one more question, and then we move over to the next presentation. And that is to come back to what is so central to presentation, and that is the power of storytelling in terms of shifting norms, a tool of normative change. So one comes back to storytelling and the nature of storytelling, which in terms of how a narrative is shaped, what is included, what is excluded, has so much to do with listener and the role of the listener and the way that the narrator imagines that listener to be responding, reacting in particular ways. What I'm wondering, what did these women who were telling their stories imagine in terms of who the listeners would be? Because there you had the camera there, your presence as researchers. So it wasn't just a simple sharing of story, of life experience. There was something else that added dimension to that. And who were they imagining they were sharing their stories with, and what the impact would be?
That's a great question. So part of the process of the workshop is that we do a story circle. We do this in the virtual workshops too, it just looks a little different. But the idea of having the participants just talk about their stories, and they get a chance to do this for, I think we usually do like 20-30 minutes, but it's a chance for them to just share and talk about what it is they want to talk about. Because again, the storytellers don't come in knowing exactly what they want to share, but this is an opportunity for them just to be able to express what it is. And then it's an opportunity for the other participants to really practice deep listening. And we found that that's really important in terms of building bonds and solidarity and feeling less alone, which is essential for when you're looking towards healing, or the idea of how do you go in this path of healing. This feeling of breaking that isolation that many survivors might be feeling is really vital. So we do this story circle. It's within that story circle that then after the participant, the storyteller gets to share everything. After the deep listening, other participants can ask some questions and also comment on, what they found really resonated with them when they heard those stories. And I think it's in that process where that helps clarify to that storyteller, maybe it is what really they are trying to share with the rest of the world, or what it is that most impacts them. And that's how, once that's kind of established, then we have a process where the storytellers start to think about their scripts. They get to write it down, what it is, and really just refine what the story is that they're wanting to tell. And again, these are actually very short. They're around 300-word scripts to be 2 to 3 minutes long. And communication research, as Laura mentioned, really shows that that's really powerful, those short kind of 2 to 3 minute stories. But it is a process to help the storyteller themselves kind of understand what it is they want to share with the broader community. I should mention, so not only do obviously SEO, we're able to use these stories in our advocacy work and our educational purposes, but all of the storytellers get to use their story for their own advocacy educational purposes too. So some people might, and they have in many different ways too. So some folks might have a particular idea in mind that they want to be sharing a story with the general public. Others might. We did a workshop that was specifically geared towards stories of health professionals and survivors, and that workshop was done in partnership with George Washington University School of Public Health. And in that workshop, we had participants who shared, health professionals who shared stories of working with survivors, and then survivors who shared stories working with health professionals, both best practices and also challenges. And so that particular, the audience there was really geared towards how to educate health professionals. So the workshops are a little bit different, but participants get to really reflect and think about what it is that they're going to say and who do they want to say it to. And then also sometimes we have a special focus on a workshop too, such as that healthcare professional workshop.
Such an important concept, that of deep listening. I love that. I mean, that is something that one could perhaps talk about some more. But I'll leave that to the end of our session. Thank you very much. Let's sort of stop at this point in time, and Comfort will be able to sort of take that up again at the end of the session. Was fantastic. Thank you. What a great beginning to our webinar today. And we are actually going to continue this particular focus on the power of storytelling, of women's own voices in terms of relating their experiences. And I'm moving on to Hrzán Youssef, and I'm thrilled, Hrzán, to see you there. Hrzán is the founder of the Orchid Project, and I imagine, Hrzán, you'll be possibly bringing that also into your presentation. So When if I can hand over to you, and the title of your presentation, the NHS experience of women affected by FGM, in terms of their own voices, their own, particular storytelling. Ruan?
Thank you so much, Maria, for the introduction. And I just want to correct something. I'm not the founder or director of the ORCID project. I'm a board trustee for the ORCID project now. So that's just something I just wanted to correct, but it's okay.
Thank you for that correction. I'm sure equally powerful and important points to have. Thank you, Ruan.
Thank you, Maria. So thank you so much for having me today, and I'm very happy to be joining the conversation today and introducing to the dialogue a new perspective from the the health, the service, people who get the services, their own voices, the voices of the FGM survivors in the UK, especially Somali women, and talk about my research. But at first, I'd like to tell you who I am. So my name is Rawan Youssef. I'm a medical doctor from Egypt with a master's degree in public health for development from London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. As a young woman born and raised in a country with statistically the highest number of women and girls who've undergone FGM in the world, fighting FGM has been a cause that's close to my heart. Which is why I realized that there's a lot I can do to help women and girls worldwide and protect them from experiencing any form of violence. I've planned, designed, and participated in different projects from my time in medical school to raise the awareness of the public as well as the future doctors on the harmful practices against women and girls. And in 2017, I was actually, I started serving as the Girl Generation Program Officer in Egypt, during which I launched the program on the national level. And for those who don't know the Girl Generation programs, actually, it was an Africa-led global collective of members and partners that worked together towards ending the practice of female genital mutilation across 10 countries in Africa. After my term in the Girl Generation, I actually started my master's degree in public health for development at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I was very keen to have my research topic on FGM to explore.
I think there's a Taylor.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We seem to be having some sort of technical
So back to my introduction. So I was saying that following when I started my master's degree at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, I was very keen to have my research topic on FGM, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today, exploring the health needs and health services experiences of Somali women in the UK, Somali women affected by FGM in the UK. I'd like to also mention that this research project was done under the supervision of Dr. Natasha Howard and with the support of Charnel Nunes, who's also joining me for the Q&A today. And yeah, so I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. Perfect.
So sorry. Unfortunately, I don't think our audience members will be, but I'm hoping to rectify that as soon as possible. But if you continue talking, we'll be able to hear you.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
sorry.
No worries. So just 1 second. Okay. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of context from the UK around FGM, and more than 1 million Somalis currently live outside the country, with the UK being home to the largest Somali community in Europe. And according to a report from City University London in collaboration with Equality Now, they estimated that 137,000 women and girls who've migrated to England and Wales from countries where FGM is practiced currently live with the consequences of FGM. and a further 60,000 girls have been born to mothers with FGM and accordingly are considered to be potentially at risk. Also, London has the highest national prevalence for any city, with an estimated 2.1% of women affected by FGM. To accommodate the health needs of women and girls affected by FGM, the NHS has national FGM support clinics, which are 8 community-based clinics that offer a range of support services for women with FGM. This service is actually available for women 18 years or older who are not pregnant when they seek support. But for those pregnant FGM survivors, they can seek support at maternity departments in their local hospitals. And for girls under 18 years old, they can access the FGM services through the specialist pediatric service at University College London Hospital. Actually, these clinics, according to the NHS website, they provide emotional support, counseling, access to FGM health advocates, referral to a specialist consultant in physical assessments, and treatment, including defibrillation. Moreover, there are several organizations and charities that work towards ending FGM by educating women and communities, increasing legal protection, and supporting survivors. Let's talk a little bit about FGM in the UK law. So FGM has been illegal in the UK since 1985, yet its prevalence has increased significantly since. But FGM is now on the public agenda, and since 2003, the UK government has required health workers to report all FGM detected as child abuse. Additionally, since October 2015, the government health and social care professionals and teachers in England and Wales are legally required to report visually confirmed or verbally disclosed cases of FGM in girls under 18 to the police. Also, the UK Department of Health developed the FGM Safeguarding and Risk Assessment Guide to help health professionals identify and assess FGM risk for patients and support the discussion with patients and family members, including pregnant women, non-pregnant adult women, children and young adults under the age of 18 who are at risk of FGM, and those who've already undergone FGM. This guide actually informs the health professionals that children under 18 who've undergone FGM must be referred to the police under the mandatory reporting duty. So, what makes our research unique? Despite increasing recognition of the importance of FGM and its negative effects on the health and well-being of affected women and girls in the diaspora communities globally, there has been little research that was published that includes the perspectives of affected women themselves. And that's what we try to do. We try to explore the perspectives of Somali women affected by FGM living in the UK on their health needs and healthcare seeking experiences. And our main objective was to actually provide recommendations for policymakers, practitioners, and researchers. So our study design was an exploratory qualitative study design using semi-structured interviews with women of Somali origin living in the UK to explore their views of their health needs and health-seeking behavior. And our primary research question was, what are the perceived health needs and health service experiences of women affected by female genital mutilation living in the UK? The study was approved by the MSc Research Ethics Committee of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And while our questions actually focused on current health service experiences rather than the FGM itself, provisions were made for any participants who experienced undue stress to attend a session with a licensed bilingual psychotherapist. However, no participants actually needed this support. Now I just want to talk a little bit about the sampling that we used. So basically, we used two kinds of sampling, the purposive sampling as well as the snowball sampling. So at first we started with the purposive sampling, where we tried to identify women who've undergone FGM, who have sought or received healthcare through the NHS, and who live permanently in the UK. However, this hasn't really worked well since people were generally not responsive. And therefore, once I reached one participant, I decided to switch to snowball sampling. And initially I was open to have women from different communities, not just the Somali community. However, Somali women were more responsive and they were more willing to be interviewed. And accordingly, each participant was asked to suggest one or more potential participants. So the interviews were conducted in July and August 2019. And each interview lasted between 20 and 40 minutes. And data saturation was reached after interviewing 15 participants, but another 5 were included as interviews had already been arranged. So let's talk about the characteristics of our participants. So the study population were 20 women of Somali origin who live in the UK between the ages of 22 and 47. 16 live in London and 4 in Sheffield. Only 1 participant was born in the UK, while 17 were born in Somalia and 2 in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. 8 participants hold a postgraduate degree, 11 participants hold an undergraduate degree, and 1 participant returned for further education. All of them underwent FGM in Somalia between the ages of 1 and 8. From these interviews, we were able to extract 6 themes, which are the health service issues, health provider attitudes, cultural preferences, safeguarding, services, education, and awareness. So let's talk about each theme and the outcome and the output from the interviews that we had with our participants. So to begin with, our first theme was the health service issues. Half of the participants reported seeing the same provider while visiting the NHS, and many described this as a reason for their comfort in sharing any health concerns they have, especially concerns around FGM, as this helped them build rapport with their healthcare providers. And according to one of our participants, and I quote, "I think now with my age and the duration I spent with that surgery and that particular GP, when you see him, we have known him since I was a child. We've kind of developed a rapport of trust between us and our family. I feel that even if something embarrassing, I wouldn't shy away from asking him for advice." The other half described seeing different providers during each visit as a problem. Also, a few participants highlighted the difficulty in securing an appointment at the GP as one of the challenges they face in seeking health services. And when asked about their experiences with their GP, one participant described it as follows: "I probably wouldn't discuss much with them because 1, it takes a really long time to make an appointment, almost 3 weeks. Also, because I don't go frequently to them, because a lot of the time, by the time you get to them, you've already found a way." Short appointment times were described by some participants as an obstacle while seeking healthcare at the NHS. They mentioned that short GP consultations don't allow them to discuss their health concerns with the providers and that they always feel rushed by the doctors. And one of our participants said, "Because the nature of the appointment is only 10 minutes sometimes, I don't get to express whatever I want because of the time, and the doctor would rush me. Sometimes I feel like the doctors rush me into things." This takes us to another point. A few participants mentioned that adding a question about the FGM status on the GP registration form can help in identifying the FGM survivors as well as their needs, making it easier for them to bring it up with their GP. And one of our participants said, "So if I can make one recommendation for the NHS, it would be that FGM should go on the health forms, whether it's a midwifery or a doctor, because you will always find people that might be affected and who don't actually feel comfortable enough, or even don't know how to talk about it or how to approach you. I have to tell you, as a healthcare professional, that you can talk about this subject, And this way, the healthcare providers will know the actual needs that the patient needs. Basically, they can't know, they won't know if you don't tell them. And if they don't ask, they don't know. So if I can make one recommendation, that would be the only one. Moving to the health provider attitudes, many participants mentioned that some of the healthcare providers didn't have enough information around FGM. They also mentioned that the healthcare providers are not well trained on how to approach this issue with women. This lack of knowledge made some of the participants feel uncomfortable bringing FGM up with their providers. And one of them said, "I wouldn't say I'm comfortable discussing this with the healthcare providers because some of these providers will not be educated. I feel like they don't know that much. You know, they might go to a training or a conference, but I see that they don't know enough about this issue." A few participants also highlighted that healthcare providers are not fully aware of the services available for women. And a handful of participants believed that although healthcare providers are not knowledgeable enough around FGM, they are more educated now than the previous years. Several participants shared some incidents where the healthcare providers were not very sensitive in approaching the issue of FGM with them. And one of our participants shared a story with us, and she said, "There was one time when I was pregnant and they were just doing an examination down there, and the lady was like, 'So you had the FGM?' And I said yes. And I had an operation after that to help, you know, make it look better. And then the lady, I asked her, 'So how does it look now after I had the operation?' And she said, 'To be honest, terrible.' She said it doesn't look good. I said, 'Oh my God,' I nearly cried. I was pregnant as well." Healthcare providers' empathy was brought up by some participants who actually agreed that the empathy of healthcare providers only makes them feel uncomfortable. So one participant shared and said, "She obviously saw that I had FGM and said, 'Oh, I can see that you had FGM. I'm sorry about that.' But she didn't do anything after, and she didn't even ask me any questions like, 'Oh, is it been impacting you?' And no one has really ever asked me, even the midwife. I think her commenting on it, 'Oh, I'm sorry you've been cut,' that made me a bit uncomfortable because it's a private place and you don't want lots of people to look at it. But when people are looking at it and then noticing that you've got FGM and her saying, 'Oh, I'm sorry you've been cut,' I just feel like, how different am I compared to other women?" So moving to another sub-theme about the health provider attitudes, one of the main issues that came up while asking the women about the reasons why they don't share with their doctors that they have had FGM done was that the doctors never ask them. So they just don't talk about it. And for some women, even when they shared with the providers that they've had undergone FGM, there was no follow-up where they were asked if they have had any complications because of that or if they needed any kind of support. And a few participants mentioned that the reason why the doctors don't ask them about FGM might be that FGM is considered a sensitive subject, which makes the providers uncomfortable in discussing with them. And one of them said, "The provider might not say anything and might not discuss it because they might feel uncomfortable. They might feel that they might offend you by asking questions." Another theme that we extracted from the interviews was actually cultural preferences. A few participants mentioned that they don't feel comfortable being examined, especially by male doctors, so they generally prefer being seen by female doctors. And one of them said, "I guess if it was a male, like a new male doctor, I may not feel very confident, whereas, I would have preferred to maybe see a female doctor, for example." And a handful of women also stated that they would rather have people from the same background who speak the same language to talk to them about FGM, since they can relate more to them and be able to share their concerns around FGM freely. One of them said, "It would be nice if someone who had FGM was available to come and speak to women. You could book an appointment with them, or maybe if there's no one trained to do that, maybe just some information, especially when you're pregnant, about FGM and pregnancy, because I don't see that in my GP surgery." One participant also mentioned that people from the community and who have had the same experience should also advise on the educational materials and protocols developed for FGM survivors. Now we're moving to one of the major issues that was raised by the participants, which is safeguarding rather than support. The majority of participants talked about the safeguarding measures taken by the UK government to protect young girls from undergoing FGM. And while most women believe that protecting young girls is important, they suggested that their approach is not really ideal and it's not really okay. Some saw the safeguarding interview done during pregnancy as degrading. And once healthcare providers know that the woman has undergone FGM, they usually add this to their records and ask if they will do the same to their daughters. However, they don't ask them if they have any problems or complications or need any kind of support, which might sound a bit rude to them. And this led some women to deny having FGM when asked during their pregnancy. And I'd like to share what one woman has shared with us, because that was a really eye-opening experience. So she said, when I was pregnant, the conversation about FGM did come up, and they did ask me just during my first midwife meeting. She did ask me if I had FGM, and I said no, I don't have FGM, and I felt like I couldn't tell her about it. I didn't want to disclose that. I feel as though you get treated differently if you disclose it, in a negative way. Not necessarily, oh, you're a victim of FGM. No, you're more to be treated as if you're likely to do it, especially when you're pregnant. So when I was in the hospital giving birth, I was in labor, I was contracting, and then the midwife there, she noticed I had FGM. She said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call someone in to have a look at this. And then she called the doctor to come in. The doctor looked, and at this point, I was in lots of pain, and she said to me, you've been cut, you've got FGM, we had a look at your record, and you haven't told anyone you've got FGM. Why did you tell no one? I said, because the type of FGM that I had, I don't think it would be noticeable. And she said, what are you having? I said, I'm having a girl. And she said, are you planning on doing that to her? When I was in labor and I was in so much pain, I was taking a breath between our conversation because I was in so much pain. And I said to her, no, I'm not going to do it to my daughter. And she said, well, you know, we're going to have to report this and we're going to have to put it on the register. And you know, this will be followed up. Again, it just felt like this is the reason why I didn't tell you guys in the beginning, because I felt like I'm going to be judged for having FGM, and almost like because you've had FGM, you're likely to do it to your child. A few participants raised the issue of choice and talked about how they felt forced to use some services which they didn't ask for. And some participants believed that they are being criminalized and targeted by the government for having undergone FGM. Participants also mentioned that safeguarding prevents them from raising the issue of FGM with their healthcare providers since they fear the prosecution of their parents. And one participant actually said, I haven't brought FGM up with my doctor. I feel like if I brought it up, it will put my family in danger. A lot of people fear that the parents are going to be accused. Moving to the next theme, which is services. Most women indicated that one of the services that should be available for all women affected by FGM is psychological counseling. One of them said, but I think counseling a lot of people would help because I think it was during childhood or whatever age you were like to have that done. Some people might still be traumatized by the experience, so counseling might be helpful. However, a few women recommended that these services should be tailored to the needs of women and not generalized. For instance, they mentioned that women who have undergone FGM at the age of 8 might be more traumatized compared to those who have had it done when they were a year old. Discussing more services available for women affected by FGM in the UK, a few participants talked about their experience with smear tests and mentioned that they usually need more time when it comes to having this test done because of their FGM. One of them said, because they send you to do this annual smear test, so when I went during the examination, the person was shocked and they didn't have the right instruments. So that made me feel like, oh my God, like there's something wrong with me. And it made me feel uncomfortable. I never went back for a smear test. It left me a bit emotional and a bit confused, and the person was very apologetic. She knew what she was doing, her role and responsibilities, but I think my case for her was not seen before. Moreover, the majority of the participants agreed that the services available for FGM survivors in the UK are insufficient. Most were not aware of these services or learned about them only during the antenatal period. And only 4 participants had de-infibulation done. And many of the women interviewed have actually been referred by their GP to a gynecologist to get a reversal. However, only a few consented to it because either they didn't feel comfortable doing it or they didn't feel like they needed it. And only 1 participant have never heard about the reverse procedure or the de-infibulation. They also mentioned that services such as FGM clinics and reversal procedures are only available in certain areas, so not all women have access to them. And one of them said, there's probably few FGM clinics, and they are like, to be honest, no one really knows where they are. There's not enough information about them to make the population go and seek help from them. Many participants discussed the role of NGOs in the fight against FGM, and a few of them indicated that people tend to respond more to NGOs than to bigger organizations. And one of them said, I personally think that people tend to respond more to non-governmental organizations anyway, because everything comes in from the people to the people. So in that respect, I think they can have a greater role in addressing FGM. And according to a few participants, there hasn't been sufficient funding recently to maintain the services provided by NGOs. However, some participants mentioned that for NGOs to do their work, there needs to be both political will and sufficient funding. The final theme we highlighted from this data was actually education and awareness. More than half the participants said that people are more aware of the consequences of FGM now and that they don't practice it as much as they used to. 2 participants also mentioned that their younger sisters haven't undergone FGM because their parents became more aware and educated after moving to the UK. One participant said, now I think more people are aware and have more information, but I think when I was having my baby like 25 years ago, I think that time it wasn't talked about. But now, I think especially where I live in Camden, there's a lot of awareness and more information out there. So now I think they are more equipped. And all participants agreed and affirmed the importance of education and awareness in addressing FGM. They agreed that health education and awareness should target everyone, parents, grandparents, high school students, medical students, and healthcare providers. And many participants used the cervical cancer awareness campaign as an example of an effective way of educating the public. They also suggested several awareness-raising tools like the media, posters at GP surgeries, sending letters home, brochures, mosques, and others. The majority of the participants called attention to the importance of also training healthcare providers and medical students and teaching them about FGM for them to be in a better position to support the FGM survivors. And one of them said, in the UK specifically, FGM is considered a safeguarding issue, but it's still not a mandatory training. And it has to be a mandatory training. It has to be part of the training for medical students and any health students. If you're studying to be a nurse, midwife, it should be part of that curriculum. They should be taught about it. And then what you're doing is you're preparing them to look after women and girls better in that space. Also, a handful of participants talked about the significance of educating parents and grandparents about FGM, since they are the ones who put their girls through this. And finally, they highlighted the importance of the role of religious leaders in raising public awareness about FGM. So based on the interviews and based on the information we received and the recommendations we received from the participants, we have come up with a few recommendations. These are, first, adding a question about the FGM status in the medical history on the GP registration forms, and then also ensuring and supporting provider continuity, just to help in building rapport with the patients and accordingly giving them, the space to share the complications and the consequences they might have had from FGM with their service providers. Also train healthcare providers around FGM, including how best to communicate with FGM survivors, as well as include FGM as part of undergraduate curriculum in all UK medical schools, and engage people from potentially affected communities in service provision, and ensure the provision of community-led community education. Also, the availability of female doctors and the promotion of services for women affected by FGM, and finally, the decentralization of FGM clinics. So yeah, these have been the findings and the recommendations that we have come up with from our research.